Hello and welcome to this week's service. My name is Reverend Kate Dean and I am proud to serve as the minister for Roslyn Hill Chapel, a Unitarian spiritual community in Hampstead, North London. It is a spiritual home for open minds. In today's service, we continue to explore this month's theme of liberation and the imposing theme of confinement, which is present for so many of us these days. While we may struggle with our new normal, the mental and financial pressures of the way that we are confined to live, we can remember that our hearts and our minds are free. They are free to find liberation through our imagination, new ways of connection, and exploration of our individual spiritual paths. And so today, through story, reading, music and reflection, we present a potluck service of contributions from our chapel members. I begin by lighting our chalice, the symbol of our liberal religious faith. May this flame be as the light of knowledge in our minds and the warmth of love in our hearts. And now I invite you to spend a few moments to think about the joys and concerns that you may be holding in your heart in these difficult times. May the light of our togetherness serve as a comforting reminder that we are in this together and that we can send our loving kindness so that it will radiate out throughout the world. Usually I invite people to greet the person sitting next to them, and if you have someone sitting next to you now, you can do so, or you may like to do it in another way, perhaps picking up the phone later to call a friend you haven't seen for a while, or organising a video conference with family members. Whatever you choose to do, please reach out to someone and greet them today. We would also be passing around our collection plate, which we can't do as we're not together, but we do have a virtual collection plate via our Just Giving page. So you can contribute either through the Just Giving page directly or via our website or contacting our administrator. Thank you for the many ways that you contribute to the upkeep of our beautiful chapel and our ongoing work. Now let us join together in singing our first hymn.
This is the story of the lion and the mouse. It's one of Aesop's fables, and it has a moral standing about small favours and kindness that is never wasted. A lion lay asleep in the forest, his great head resting on his paws. A timid little mouse came upon him unexpectedly, and in her fright and haste to get away, ran across the lion's nose. "Oh," said the lion. Roused from his nap, the lion laid his huge paw angrily on the tiny creature, ready to kill her. "Oh," said the mouse. "Spare me," begged the little poor mouse. "Please let me go, and some day I will surely repay you." The lion was much amused to think that a mouse could ever help him. But he was generous, and finally he let the mouse go. Phew, thought the mouse. Well, some days later, while stalking his prey in the forest, the lion was caught in the toils of a hunter's net. He was all scrambled up inside, and unable to free himself, he filled the forest with his angry roaring. He was trying to get free of the net. Now the mouse knew his voice and quickly found the lion struggling in the net. Running to one of the great ropes that bound him, she used her little teeth to gnaw through until the netting parted, and soon the lion was free. "You laughed when I said I would repay you," said the mouse. "Now you see that even a mouse can help a lion." It's true, a kindness is never wasted, and even a tiny creature can help a bigger creature. Have a think about how you've helped nature or smaller creatures around you. Maybe you've gone to run a bath in the evening with your parents, and there's a spider in the bath. And although you might be feeling a bit scared, it's much smaller than you and probably scared of you. And you've probably done it a kind thing and taken it out of the bath before the water gets to it. There are lots of different ways that kindness can never be wasted. Have a think in your family how you show kindness.
Hello, this is George Appleby. This is a poem I wrote, I think, about 3 weeks ago, about waking up in the morning and thinking, gosh, I'm still alive. So here's the poem, Awakening. As if under sentence of death, to judge from the London virus news, I greet each day with fresh delight and humbly thank the source of life for new light and the gift of choice. I find my loving partners well and dearest family all alive. My body feels relaxed and calm. My brain has rested overnight. Seems they don't fear the reaper's sighs. But we know all are sentenced so, if sooner for this newborn plague. Though I, who have ignored this fate, yet hear the figures black each day, still chance my life on risks I take. Right now, I seek to change the odds with diet, exercise alone, and hope, but use this moment to declare, I thank you, thank you, thank you for this golden sunlit morning light.
I thought about this week's theme, that of liberation and confinement. I was reminded of all of the practices and rituals of confinement that one finds in almost all spiritual traditions. And those are always linked with liberation. In the Native American tradition, a young person would go up into the mountains alone and fast and pray until their name was revealed to them, their true name. And often this would be accompanied by a totem animal. And that name introduces them to themselves, to who they really are, in order that they may follow that path for the rest of their lives, the path of becoming who they could be if they would be who they really are. The Hindu tradition encourages those seeking samadhi, or the unity with the divine, to become sadhus and go up into the mountains and in the caves and there meditate until one dissolves their sense of individualized self into the being of the divine. In Christianity, that tradition of the retreat is established by Jesus when he spends 40 days in the desert, again, fasting and praying in solitude. In the Islamic tradition, the Sufis encourage one throughout their life to go on retreat for 3 days, for 7 days, up to 40 days of solitary prayer, reflection, and meditation. And throughout history, there have been wonderful examples of people who have found that great release, that great liberation from limitation in seclusion. In the 20th century is Thomas Merton, who builds his own hermitage in the woods of Kentucky and yet stays in touch with all of the momentous occasions of his own time. And in England, there is no finer example than that of Julian of Norwich, who establishes herself as an anchoress in a cell at the Church of St. Julian in Norwich, and who receives an incredible series of visitations in which the divine is revealed to her as she is revealed to herself. And all of these examples are how one needs silence to hear that voice which constantly cometh from within. And the message that Julian of Norwich leaves us is the message that the divine revealed to her, which is that all will be well, and all will be well, and in all things all will be well, which is a message it's good to remind everyone of in these times of challenge and fear, and also of a community coming together, and an incredible opportunity to find those moments of silence in which one can discover our true selves and hopefully just a taste of ecstasy. Be well.
This is a poem called The Everything Seed by Carol Martinancho. Have you ever watched a seed grow? Have you ever noticed how it begins? So small, so still, so quiet, like a gift wanting to be opened. And how slowly it wakes up, begins to unfold, growing into something larger and larger and larger. Then you know that whatever comes from a seed usually ends up looking, well, very little like the seed it came from, which is also true of the very first seed. Once, long, long ago, way back before the beginning, so long ago, there was no such thing as time because there was no one there to count it. Everywhere was a huge, deep, mysterious place, like something waiting to happen. There were no stars, no sun or moon. There was no place like Earth, not a drop of water or a single tree or rock or flower, and no living beings anywhere. But in that deep, waiting space was hidden the tiniest point of something no bigger than a seed. It was not a flower seed. It was not an elm tree seed. It was not a seed of corn, although all those things were included in the seed. You might call it the everything seed, because that is what it became. No one knows where the first seed came from, or how it was planted, or how it knew, in the way that only seeds seem to know, how long to wait for just the right moment to sprout and grow. But all at once this tiny seed, cradled and nourished in the rich soil of space, woke up, broke open, and began to unfold. Unfolding and blossoming forth into an enormous, blazing ball of bright light, like a great grandmother sun. And the universe was born. Out fluttered the galaxies like a storm of snowflakes, swirling and gathering into the brightest, most blindingly beautiful cloud of stars. And out of those star clouds whirled our own star, the one we call the sun, and our earth and our moon, and all the round spinning planets we have learnt to name. And this is the secret of that tiny seed. You and I were there in the very beginning, just as the idea for each leaf on a big oak tree lies hidden inside an acorn. We were all there with the stars and planets, all the rocks and oceans, plants and animals and people. Everything that is now, ever was, or ever will be, was inside that first tiny seed. So, Whenever you hold a seed in your hand and wonder what it could become, imagine how you and all that is here once came from the tiniest speck of an everything seed, before it sprouted and grew long, long ago in the way back beginning of time. Now, if this were an ordinary story, it would end right here. But this story of the universe keeps unfolding. What once began in a blazing blossom of light continues every day. New stars sprout open in the deep soil of space. New plants and animals appear on earth. Seeds of many kinds are scattered everywhere to help us remember. And new people are born every day with the spark of that first light still alive and burning deep inside, waiting, like the everything seed, to shine in ways that are yet to be known.
Hello, I'm Emily, and this is a reflection on the village of Eyam. Current global events bring to mind the stories I've read and heard about the small rural village in Derbyshire called Eyam. And Google assures me that the correct pronunciation is Eyam, and it's a place that many of you may be familiar with because it's close by to the Nightingale Centre in Great Hoxlow. Maybe you've passed through the village of Eyam, or maybe you've even stopped there. So in the latter part of the 17th century, the village became afflicted with the devastating bubonic plague. It was 1665 and London was suffering greatly at the time with its own epidemic of the deadly disease. In fact, the disease-carrying fleas came to the village from London via a consignment of cloth to be used to make new clothes as the villagers prepared for their upcoming well-dressing festival. What set Eyam apart from large cities like London was that as a remote rural village, the villagers were already relatively isolated, and as such, they were in a position to make an extraordinary choice in response to the outbreak. They decided to quarantine themselves. Over a period of a bit more than a year, the villagers isolated themselves from all the neighbouring villages. They did not leave Eyam, nor did any outsider enter their village. Within the village itself, church services were moved to an open outdoor area where they could remain separated from one another. An early example of social distancing. Does all of this sound eerily familiar? Today, a large stone known as the Boundary Rock can be visited about a mile from the village. I've looked at pictures of it online and I've seen the holes that were drilled into the top. These were filled with vinegar in order to disinfect coins that were left as payment for the medicines, food and supplies that were left from neighbouring villages. The numbers vary, but it's believed that the population of the town at the time was somewhere between 350 up to 800 people, and around 260 villages were recorded as having succumbed to the Black Death. And the number that died in the neighbouring towns? 0. That's because the selfless act of those in Eyam worked. Because of the quarantine, villages, towns, and even cities in the region were spared the plague. And so, history has judged this incredible event as a successful example of quarantine that worked. No doubt countless lives were saved. What can we learn from this as we go through a modern global pandemic? Historians, when comparing this example of quarantine to others in other times and other places and with different diseases, say that the success of what occurred in Ian was largely the result of the community's acceptance, resolve, and fortitude in sticking to it. I wonder about the source of spiritual nourishment for the folk of the village at the time. History records only 2 instances of villagers attempting to break the quarantine. How on earth did they do it? What was the motivation for such evidently strong resolve? The challenges and hardships endured by the townspeople were no doubt innumerable, some expected and many unexpected, and some possibly too much to bear. Just as the challenges and hardships faced by the individuals and entire communities in this time of pandemic are no doubt innumerable, some expected and many unexpected, and some possibly too much to bear. So what got them through? What did they say to themselves about their plight? How did they deal with it? Were they bolstered and heartened by the prospect of saving others? Perhaps their radical response gave them a sense of purpose or a sense of control over a situation that was well out of their control. As a Christian community, were they inspired by the remembrance of Christ's sacrifice on the cross, with its strong message of personal sacrifice in favour of the greater good? Upon reading and learning more about the villagers' plight, I'm intrigued by the relationship between 2 spiritual leaders in the community at the time. The rector of the parish at the time was William Mompesson. The village's former rector, Thomas Stanley, was still living in Eyam but had been ejected from the post due to his Puritan beliefs and the rejection of the Act of Uniformity of 1662. Stanley was apparently popular and well regarded by the villagers, but it was Mompesson, with his faith in the unified Anglican Church, who held the official position as rector. What would these 2 leaders have thought of each other, with their opposing views on religion and church politics, not to mention the competition felt with one of them holding the position formerly occupied by the other? A pretty standard and understandable recipe for anything from mild irritation to downright hatred. But here's the interesting part. As the number of plague victims grew, the 2 men are said to have put aside their differences and become united to put their plan of isolation into action. So perhaps the ultimate lesson for us when reflecting on the events that took place in Eyam in 1665 to 1666 are that more than ever, when faced with great adversity, the way forward is to seek the common ground. Always to seek the common ground. To find the common understanding about what really matters. To put aside prejudices, petty disputes, large disputes, ancient grudges. To work on finding ways to get through. Together, united. Just as there was for those villagers, there's much in our current situation that we can't control. And just like those villagers of so long ago, there are positive steps. If not difficult, if not radical, positive steps that can be taken and steps towards positivity that can be made by each and every one of us.
Let us sing our final hymn. We close with a blessing with words by Reverend Scott Cooper. We bow our heads in order to imagine not one path, but many. We imagine a path forward for those who cannot imagine any path forward because of poor health, financial hardship, family crises, and other roadblocks we cannot begin to understand or imagine. We struggle to imagine a path forward for those who are forced to leave a homeland against their will, and for those unable to leave a war-torn homeland despite their lives being in danger. We imagine a path forward for those who feel lonely. The arc will bend toward justice because we have dared to travel with love in our hearts. Blessed be, and Amen.